Well, hello everybody, so glad you could make it. What's up? Athena here. Welcome back to Code 3 Life. I hope you've been liking the new direction of this channel because I certainly have been. If you like it, consider leaving me a tip on Ko-Fi? Coffee? Whatever that is called, which is linked in the description. And like and comment, and for the love of God, please subscribe. Now, let's get down to brass tacks and talk about firefighters. Trigger warning for mention of sexual assault, images of fire, death, suicide, incarceration, the prison industrial complex, mentions of crimes such as child abuse, sexual assault, domestic abuse, drunk driving, and human trafficking, and violence against people of color. While I definitely have criticized the actions of firefighters before, and don't you worry, I got more in the chamber, don't you fucking worry about that, today is going to be a little different because in this house, we respect Wildland firefighters. Because they're the people who call themselves firefighters whose job is to actually fight fire. But there's a lot you might not know about this not often talked about side of the firefighting world, and unfortunately, that side gets dark. Like, really dark. Chapter 1. Firefighter classification. First, some explanation is in order. When most people think of a firefighter, they think of something like this. This type of firefighter is what's called a structural firefighter because they generally fight fires in residences and commercial structures, or buildings. They need to get a certification called a Firefighter 1 in order to do the basic things their job requires, and they can get their Firefighter 2 if they wish to be promoted to a higher officer level. Some fire departments require all of their employees to get their Fire 1 and their Fire 2. However, most of a structural firefighter's job, usually 70 to 90%, depending on the system, is to run EMS calls. This is because as the construction, maintenance, and inspection of buildings has modernized, fires that used to plague the country, like the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire of 1911, the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, and the San Francisco earthquake and fire of 1906, are basically a thing of the past. See, buildings that are made of wood, like the buildings that were built in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, tend to burn. Buildings that are made of steel and concrete generally don't. Unless, of course, you use cheap cladding on your buildings that has already been proven to help fire spread. But don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. It only killed poor people and immigrants. Anyway, that's why structure firefighters spend so much of their time not fighting fires. Because fires just don't happen very often. Fire departments often require their firefighters to get their EMR, EMT, or even their medic license to work. Because so much of their job is to run medical calls. In fact, some fire departments even operate the ambulance services in their area. The other type of firefighter is a wildland firefighter, and they don't get nearly as much media attention, even though they are entirely different from this kind of firefighter. This is a wildland firefighter. It's a different certification, colloquially called a red card, with different training. Some people do have both their red card and their Fire 1 and 2, but you don't need to have your red card in order to be a structural firefighter, and you don't need to have your Fire 1 and 2 in order to be a wildland firefighter. The skill sets are vastly different. There are a few other types of firefighters that I won't be talking about today, such as aircraft firefighters who fight fires caused by airplane crashes, shipboard firefighters who fight fires that start on ships, and aerial firefighters who fly those fucking badass airplanes and helicopters that drop water and fire retardant on fires from the air. These types of firefighters are all cool and deserve your respect, but we won't be talking about them today. Chapter 2. Let's hear it for the fucking wildland firefighters. Every summer in the US, and earlier too, yay climate change, the news stations begin to flash images that have become all too familiar. Plumes of smoke reaching what seems to be miles into the air, lines of cars along the evacuation routes, ash choking the sun, orange flames shot on ultra-zoom lenses, and then, of course, the money shot. The devastation that wildland fires leave behind. Homes razed, leaving behind nothing but their foundations. Whole towns destroyed. It's sort of a yearly ritual, especially for those who grew up in wildfire country, like I did. And as the years wear on, more and more of the country is wildfire country. The Waldo Canyon fire of 2012 devastated the neighborhood that I grew up in. It destroyed nearly 350 homes, and mine was almost one of them. 2 people died in that fire. We had to evacuate the area with 35,000 other people, and when we returned, our garden hoses weren't where we had left them. We quickly realized why. The firefighters had been using them to fight the fire and save our house. To this day, their sooty boot prints can still be seen in the stones in our backyard. It took 780 personnel 17 days to fight the Waldo Canyon fire. It was, at the time, Colorado's most destructive wildfire in history. Less than a year later, the Black Forest fire tore through the other side of the city that I grew up in. This fire was even worse than the Waldo Canyon fire. 36,000 people evacuated, and the fire destroyed more than 500 homes. 2 people were killed. My family knew them. They were my dad's coworker and his wife. They were killed trying to evacuate. We think that they thought they had more time than they did. About 460 personnel fought the fire for 9 days. It was, at the time, the most destructive wildfire in Colorado's history. 2020 was a hard year in more ways than one. The Cameron Peak fire started in August of that year and would go on to burn 326 square miles of forest and small towns, the largest forest fire in Colorado history, breaking a record that had been set just 7 weeks earlier. I worked in a city close enough to the fire that ash rained from the sky most days. The sun was blotted out, and if I didn't know better, I would have thought the world was ending. Almost 470 buildings were lost. Over 1,000 personnel fought the fire for 112 days. No one died in that fire, luckily, but I did treat at least one person who committed suicide after losing their home in the blaze. One of them jumped from the 6th floor of a hotel and into the lobby below. I was picking their teeth out of my boots for a week. The very next year, the Marshall Fire of 2021 tore through an area that I have spent a lot of my adult life. It started in a wildland area, but this fire was different. It very quickly began burning the cities of Superior and Louisville. In 12 hours, it shattered the Black Forest Fire's record for most destructive fire in Colorado's history. In less than 2 days, it burned over 1,000 buildings and killed 2 people. Now, Colorado is far from the only state that's affected by wildfires, and I would be deluded beyond measure to think that my close brushes with wildfires make me any kind of victim. And that's the point. I and a lot more people out there would be dead or homeless due to wildfire if not for the work that wildland firefighters do. And it's hard fucking work. And that's why in my house, we respect the fuck out of wildland firefighters. Chapter 3, A Day in the Life of a Wildland Firefighter.
Well, sweet. Thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me. I really appreciate it.
Of
Um,
course.
I had some questions for you because I'm doing a video about wildland firefighters.
Okay.
Um, and, I can do like all kinds of research about the kinds of shifts that you work or like the conditions, but I wanted to actually talk to someone who'd actually done it.
Sure.
Um, and so I just wanted to get your perspective. So, first, would you mind sharing how long you've been a wildland firefighter?
No problem at all. So I started working with the Forest Service as part of an engineering co-op that would have been 2011. And then I got certified and signed up as a wildland firefighter. It would have been 2012 through 2015.
And so that would be the red card, right?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, cool. And which states have you worked in?
So I've worked in Michigan, Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho.
Quite a few. Okay. Did you have like longer rotations where they flew you out for the whole summer, or would they fly you in for like a few weeks at a time and then fly you back out for R&R, or like what kind of things did you do for that?
So what we did, they considered a militia crew. They had a main department that those folks always did rotations. As part of the militia, you'd have 21 people signed up. As soon as, say, California, Wyoming, Montana needed support, they would call us in. And we actually drove from Michigan all the way to Montana. So that was nice. It took a couple days, but you got to see the entire country, kind of got prepped for going into the wildland firefighters. And it was good.
That's awesome. And then you would just stay there for the entire summer?
We'd be there for 2, 3 weeks at a time, and then
Okay.
that's when R&R would begin.
Okay.
So,
Cool.
yep, it'd be at least 2 straight weeks, 16-hour days, and then the third week, if they needed you, everyone had to vote on it, and if everyone agreed, then you'd do another third week of 16-hour days.
When you're like at the fire camps and everything,
Mhm.
how close would you be to the fire like when you're sleeping and everything? Because I know that there'd be someone like on watch at all times, but would you still be pretty close to the fire while you're resting?
Yeah, usually a couple miles away. So they always had folks that were watching it based on wind direction, storms coming in. As part of the militia crew, we were more swampers where we go cut trees, cut ground line so that, say, a fire comes towards the area, you got bare mineral dirt, and then the fire would hopefully stop there or soon after slow down.
Okay.
And then you had hot shots who were right on the fire. They were actually trying to suppress it, trying to get ahead of it.
Okay.
Those are a specialized crew, a lot of them out west to like New Mexico, Wyoming, Montana, and then they roam all around the country wherever they're needed.
So I know respiratory protection is like it's definitely like a difficult subject because it's I mean frankly it's just hard to do much of anything with respiratory protection and then
Sure.
um, adding on top of that like if you have to carry anything with you and then if your respiratory protection gets heavily soiled or wet or things like that and then adding on top of that various states having different regulations for respiratory protection. Did you notice like in all of the different states that you've worked with, was there a difference in the protection that you were offered if you were offered protection? And then was there a difference in like how in like the cultures of how the respiratory protection was enforced?
No, in each event that we were at, we always had that protection. We always had the deployment. I mean, they look kind of like a space blanket, but basically it's deployment where if the fire came on you, you always had those inspected, making sure that they were the right size. So
Okay.
yeah, during the summers I was out there, I mean, I didn't really see any discrepancies, and everyone was good at the safety training of making sure you had your protective deployment, making sure you had that protection.
What kind of uh respiratory protection were you provided?
It would have been canisters. I can't remember the name, but yeah, they had
Okay.
special canisters that you'd use.
Okay. Okay. Cool. A lot of states use inmates for wildland fire protection. Did you ever work with any inmate crews?
No, ma'am. So it was always militia crews or hot shots.
Okay.
There would always be a central camp. Sometimes it would be a like a army base or a nearby base that wasn't in use, and then you just meet up there. You'd have a lunch haul and then get redirected.
That is all the questions I had. Do you have anything else that you'd like to say or anything you'd like to share?
Sure. Um, One of the cooler experiences working in like Wyoming, Montana would be seeing the lightning storms come through. You had a lot of dry lightning. But then when you actually had the lightning come through, you'd see the next day you'd be working on a fire and across the mountain you'd see smoke starting and you knew, hey, in a day or two that's where I'm going next
Yeah.
because that lightning would strike dry brush and just interesting to see. Kind of knew what was going on.
Wow.
Chapter 4. Okay, so what's the dark side? You might be reaching this part in the video, and if you have, thank you, I really appreciate it. And thinking, okay, wildfires sound bad. Fighting them sounds hard. but you didn't have to introduce this video like it was a fucking true crime podcast. And that's true. I didn't. But at the same time, I wouldn't necessarily be incorrect in doing that because you might remember chain gangs from movies where they build railroad tracks and perform various other types of backbreaking manual labor and other adorable hijinks like that. But I'm sorry to break it to you, those are more than just cutesy homages to the past. In real life, prisoners actually were exploited to build some of our nation's railways, but not most of them. That would be with Chinese immigrants, despite what Ayn Rand might think. Yeah, sorry to break it to you, bros in the audience who read Atlas Shrugged and just assumed rich white people built the world. That's just not how things work. When it wasn't Chinese immigrants, it was black slaves. When it wasn't black slaves, it was Irish indentured servants, or impoverished Swedish peasants, or working class women, or working class queers, or. And yes, I read Atlas Shrugged too. It was a requirement of me graduating high school. Not by my school, mind you, but by my mom and stepdad. Please make all the assumptions that you care to. I'm the only one out of my 5 siblings to have done so, and I'm vastly more mentally ill because of it. But back to the prisoners. What I was trying to say before I got distracted by railroads is that whenever there is a wildland fire burning, there is an incredibly good chance that there are prisoners being forced to fight that fire for less than minimum wage. And I really don't mean to be coy with my phrasing. It's surprisingly hard to lock down numbers for this. California is for sure the most forthcoming with their use of prisoners to fight fires. Approximately 30 to 40% of their wildland firefighter labor force is made up of incarcerated people, but it's hard to find an exact number. At least 12 states besides California use inmates to fight fires, including Colorado, Georgia, Montana, Arizona, Idaho, Wyoming, North Carolina, Nevada, Washington, Tennessee, Oregon, and South Carolina. What's more is that this dangerous, backbreaking, and sometimes deadly work is being done for pennies a day, if these workers get paid at all. In this article, Joshua Bly recalls making $6 per day, working alongside the free firefighters who are making $300 a day. David Desmond in this article talks about making $1 an hour, but there's a more rose-tinted feel to his remembrances. Amika Moda wonders in this article, if we're safe to serve our community, how can we not be safe to live there? She wonders this while musing about the fact that she makes 37 cents an hour as a lead engineer. You might be wondering how this is legal. Federal minimum wage is $7.25, right? Totally a livable wage, by the way. So how is it that people can be forced to work for $1 an hour, 37 cents an hour, $6 a day? Nothing at all. Well, friends, that would be because of a super cool and freedom-loving thing called the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution. The 13th Amendment was passed after the American Civil War, and it decrees, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Slavery or involuntary servitude shall not exist, except as punishment for a crime. So, when a country has the highest incarceration rate in the world and the highest number of incarcerated people, period, even worse than the bad countries, like the ones with communism and dictatorships, And you have it written into the fucking freedom-loving Constitution that you can use these people for slave labor. What do? Simple. You build them into the infrastructure of your country. 30 states have explicit instructions in their state emergency operation plans to use incarcerated people as a resource. Inmates have been used in disasters and crises, from cleaning up after the devastating mudslides in California in 2005 to searching for debris from the Columbia disaster in 2003. While some states have passed laws removing slavery exception language from their constitution, the first state being Colorado, in 2018, that still hasn't brought the protections advocates have hoped it would. During the COVID pandemic, things really got kicked up to 11. Inmates were forced to create hand sanitizer that they themselves were not allowed to use. They had to do lead paint and asbestos removal, and allegedly were threatened with violence if they refused. They were offered a whopping $6 an hour to dig graves on Hart Island in New York, a task that is a thing when we're not in the middle of a pandemic, but the new part is that they were given PPE to do it. The mayor's office said that this development was not COVID specific. With all this groundwork laid, I want you to try to imagine what it's like to be a wildland firefighter when you are not the type of person that people are interested in thinking about as a hero. Chapter 5. So, about that chain gang. As we already talked about, the life of a wildland firefighter is brutal. 12 to 16-hour days in the sweltering heat, because remember, most wildfires happen during the summer and are made much worse by heat waves, clearing brush and digging trenches, often within sight of the blaze that absolutely has the power to kill you. You sleep in camps near the fire, better hope the guy keeping watch doesn't fall asleep, where you can taste the smoke from the fire with every breath, and you can hear its roar in the distance like a monster as you try to fall asleep every night. And the next morning, you wake up and do it all over again, usually for 21-day rotations. And this whole time, in the back of your mind, the thought might be percolating that between 1990 and 2019, about 17 firefighters were killed fighting these fires, and the next death might be you. So, what prisoner in their right mind would choose this over staying in prison? Well, turns out these conditions and odds are actually way better than staying in a lot of prisons around the country. An article by CNN interviewed Jose Santana, an inmate who got into the firefighter program through his prison. The article states, he described massive brawls in Wasco Prison and the Sierra Correction Center, with inmates beating each other with broom handles, kicking each other in the head. The guards' smoke canisters tossed to break up the melees, cast gray haze. A war zone, said Santana. I had to get out of there. I heard of Mountain Home, a fire camp for inmates. Maybe I could do it. And these prisons are terrible for more reasons than just overcrowding and violence. In May of 2022, more than 100 prisoners filed an amicus brief reporting the horrendous living conditions of the California Correctional Facility in Susanville, California. They described how the roof would leak, flooding their cells, causing algae and black mold. That facility was decommissioned in June of 2023 because it hadn't been kept up to code. And it would have taken $500 million to bring it up to code. This prison provided a huge number of inmates every year for Fire Camp, the adorably named program for inmates being forced to choose between risking their life in prison and risking their lives fighting fires for pennies. So anyway, let's talk about these actual fire camps. Once the inmates have gone through the pretty rigorous process of being selected for the program, i.e., they have to have had good behavior in prison, have a psych eval, and file a petition, they get to join the fire line. They often work side by side with the free firefighters, although there seems to be some division in the type of labor that's done, given the type of injuries that the groups are likely to suffer. Free firefighters are approximately 9 times more likely to suffer burns and approximately twice as likely to suffer dehydration and other heat-related conditions. I'm guessing because they're the ones closest to the flames. Inmate firefighters are 4 times as likely to suffer physical injuries, such as fractures, cuts, and dislocations. And I'm guessing that that's because they're usually the ones clearing the brush and digging the trenches. This is not to say that the free firefighters are not also doing that, but inmate firefighters are going to be doing that as a greater part of their job than the free firefighters are. The most interesting part of this data that I found is that inmates are 8 times more likely to suffer from injury caused by inhaling smoke or other particulates, which is interesting to me. If you'll allow me to go on a brief speculative tangent here, I find this kind of strange. It could be that by clearing bone-dry brush and dirt, they could be inhaling those particulates. But also, according to the research I've done, they also should not be as close to the actual fire as the free firefighters. So I did some digging, so to speak. There is no national standard for respiratory protection for wildland firefighters. It's covered state by state. For example, in Oregon, all personnel must be distributed a NIOSH, or National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, approved respirator such as an N95 or a P100 to be worn voluntarily, and include yearly training on the importance of using a respirator and recognizing the signs of smoke inhalation and carbon monoxide poisoning, which, yes, can happen outside, no matter what Reddit says, you fucking idiots. Washington, on the other hand, makes no mention at all of respirators on their list of required PPE. California also makes no mention of respirators on their list of required PPE, but they've gotten some attention the past few years ever since TDA Research began working under the Science and Technology Directorate's Wildland Firefighter Respiratory Project to develop a respirator designed specifically for wildland firefighters. It's got 2 parts. One for filtering out particles, like smoke and dust, and one for absorbing gas, like carbon monoxide. It sounds like a really cool project, and I honestly don't know how it's going. All I have to go off of is this document, which states that the field assessment will occur in May of 2021, and this article, which had wildland firefighters test a few different types of respirators for only 10 minutes, and not a single one worked. So, here's what I can speculate from my own personal experience. As some of you might know, but most of you probably don't, I was a mining engineer before I became a paramedic. Mining as an industry is governed by MSHA, which is like OSHA, but for mining. MSHA is, as you might expect in an industry where every single law is written in blood, often in the blood of several people per incident, very strict on the enforcement of the policies of the industry. And that obviously includes policies for respiratory protection. However, even in the mining industry, you cannot be given a citation for not wearing a respirator. The site can only be given a citation for not providing you one. And ideally, it would not be putting you in the position of needing to use one in the first place. The site would be using engineering or environmental controls to avoid exposure to toxic gases or dust, such as improving ventilation in the area or using robots to do the work, especially in toxic areas or things like that. But even so, you can't force a person to use a respirator that makes work difficult, especially when they're also using eye protection. And a respirator can fog up eye protection faster than you can fucking blink. So a lot of people will just not wear it. And not to mention, if I may go further down this mine shaft, the idea of a respirator that can absorb toxic gases. If I'm not mistaken, the respirator being developed by the Science and Technology Directorate's Wildland Firefighter Respiratory Project probably works a lot like my W65 self-rescue respirator did when I was training in an underground mine. You can see it in this picture, right there on my left hip. Yep. That's 19-year-old me. Fuck, what happened to me? Anyway, so the W65 contains hopcolite, which is a trade name, but basically it causes a chemical reaction that turns carbon monoxide into carbon dioxide. It can only be used once, and it's an exothermic reaction, which means it gets hot. Like, really hot. Like, blister your lips and lungs hot. Like, people have been reported to tear it off their face because they would rather just die of CO poisoning than slowly die of having their trachea blistered type of hot. They did improve the thing, so now it only gets to about 150 degrees instead of 300 in a 2% CO environment. But, like, still. So, if this new respirator is anything like the self-rescue respirator that I was given in case of mine fires and explosions, I don't know how well it'll work. And since I haven't found any news of whether or not it's been implemented... Holy fuck, this is a tangent. And for those of you who are confused, no, Wildland firefighters do not use SCBAs like structural firefighters do. It just wouldn't make sense to. The tanks that structure firefighters carry last between 15 and 20 minutes, and that's really only as long as structure firefighters can last in a burning house anyway, with the heat and the equipment that they're carrying. Remember, Wildland firefighters are on the line for 12 to 16 hours. Changing out tanks every 10 to 30 minutes, plus carrying them on their backs, on top of all the extra work that they'd be doing, would just be a recipe for more heat injuries and exhaustion. All this to say, the fact that inmate firefighters are 8 times more likely to suffer inhalation injuries than the free firefighters are makes me think that either they aren't being given respiratory protection at all, or they are being given respiratory protection, but they aren't being educated on the importance of wearing it, which honestly is just as bad. You aren't going to wear something on your face for 12 to 16 hours a day that's uncomfortable and makes your breath all hot on your face and is kind of hard to breathe through if you don't understand that exposure to that much smoke and dust and dirt vastly decreases your lung function, increases your body's systemic inflammatory response, and increases your risk of lung cancer and cardiovascular disease. We've seen what happens when people aren't educated on how important it is to wear a little piece of cloth over their face, let alone a heavy respirator. And while there has been quite a bit of research on the long-term health risks of fighting structure fires, there has been almost no research at all on the long-term health risks of fighting wildland fires. And when you remember that inmates are doing so much of that labor, you sort of can't help but suspect that there's a reason for that. With all this discussion on the risk of injuries, I do want to touch on the deaths of these inmate wildland firefighters. The data is surprisingly hard to find, but then again, maybe that shouldn't be so surprising. In California, in the past 35 years, 6 inmates have lost their lives fighting wildland fires. And if I'm reading the data on this very confusing website correctly, California has reported 15 wildfire deaths since 1990, which puts the inmate death rate at right around 40%, which is the percentage of wildland firefighters that are inmates. However, this is just the data I could find. Chapter 6: The Prison Industrial Complex. This has been a really complex topic to cover. Not just because the prison system and the exploitation of the people within it is a complicated thing, but because it's been sort of an emotional journey for me. I have been the victim of multiple crimes, but the thing that weighs so much more heavily on me is that I have seen the damage done by so fucking many criminals. I have cared for battered wives, husbands, boyfriends, girlfriends, children. I have held a child in my arms who became a ward of the state just hours before. whose parents had been sent to jail because of the horrendous abuse they had committed against him for the entirety of his 3 years on this earth. I have held rape victims as they cried. I have held a woman as she shook from a psychogenic seizure caused from the PTSD that her nightmarishly abusive ex-husband gave her, the seizure that her daughter had called 911 for, a psychogenic seizure that, despite being non-epileptic, can absolutely fucking kill you if it goes untreated, by the way, which had been triggered by the woman's panic attack that she had had because she had just received news that her ex-husband was being released from prison in 2 weeks. And then I hear the stories from my peers. My husband is the blackest of black clouds, and he has run more fatal car crashes than I have by several orders of magnitude. Most of them have been caused by drunk drivers who survived. He, too, has pulled innumerable rape victims out of frat houses. He has held a human trafficking victim after she had been missing from her parents' home for over a year. We first responders have suffered so much secondhand trauma at the hands of people who made the choice to commit a crime against an innocent person. And that trauma is increased 1,000-fold in the actual victims of those crimes. So in all of this discussion, I do want to make a mention that whenever there is a violent offender in prison, there is one or more victims of that violent offender. And I do also want to hold space for them. On the fire line, though, most of the inmates are not violent offenders. It is worth stating that in 2015, California admitted that almost 40% of all inmates fighting fires have previous convictions for violent offenses, something that, as I'm sure you can guess, everyone was thrilled to find out about, especially the state firefighters union, since free firefighters never commit violent offenses. Okay, hush, I will get to you in later videos. Wait your fucking turn. But anyway, the point is, California's little whoopsie-doodle aside, prisoners can only join the fire line if they are nonviolent offenders. And this country has a vested interest in funneling people into prisons so that it can benefit from the free or extremely discounted labor of incarcerated people. This is not speculation, and I am not being dramatic. For-profit prisons, the places whose business model depends on there being as many prisoners as possible, create an environment that intentionally creates recidivism against the suggestions made by research, such as relocating prisoners away from their families, making phone calls prohibitively expensive or unavailable entirely, cutting prisoners off from their support network, cutting corners on staffing to increase profits, leading to more prisoner-on-prisoner violence, and refusing to provide exit counseling to prepare the prisoners to have a job and housing once they are released, to name a few. After all, if 50 to 60% of your released inmates get rearrested and start producing profit for you once they're under your roof again, better for you, right? And I would be remiss if I didn't bring up the fact that incarceration affects people of color vastly more frequently than it affects white people. Some people, like my dad, would say, well, they should just stop breaking the laws more. But that is really fucking disingenuous when you take into account the fact that the cops are investigating people of color so much more often. Here are some facts and logic, if that's your thing. In NYC in 2023, cops stop and frisked black people in 59% of their stops, and Latina people in 30% of their stops. That makes up 89% of their total stops. Now, you might think, but Athena, NYC is a very racially diverse city, and maybe Black and Latina people really do make up 89% of the population. Yeah, no. Black and Latina people make up 23 and 29% of the population, respectively. which means even though black people make up 23% of the population, they were stopped 59% of the time. You think statistically they might turn up illegal shit more often and therefore get arrested more often? Maybe. Because that's how fucking numbers work. Let's look at the numbers for white people. White people make up almost 38% of the population in NYC. How often do you think they got stopped? No, don't scroll back and look. I want you to guess. 6% of the fucking time. You seriously think white people are doing less shit? No, motherfucker, the cops just aren't looking for us. And I also want to point out, look at this number. 68% of the time, the cops didn't even arrest the person or give a summons, which means that for 68% of the stops, the cops put their hands on and assaulted an innocent citizen, most of whom were black. If I had a 32% success rate at my job, and I also racially profiled and assaulted people while I was at it, I would get fired, and I would fucking deserve it. And when white people are caught doing illegal shit, they aren't punished to the same degree as people of color when they're caught doing illegal shit. For example, according to the United States Sentencing Commission, black men receive sentences that are about 19% longer than white men with similar backgrounds for the same crime. And that rate has been increasing since 2005, when the Supreme Court passed a case that gave federal judges a lot more discretion on how lenient or how harsh they can be. Interesting what happens when the people in charge are given discretion, huh? This is what people mean when they say the prison industrial complex. The government and the racist, violent law enforcement arm of it singles out people, specifically poor people, traumatized people, mentally ill people, and people of color, and funnel those people into prisons and then coerce them into working for pennies or nothing at all to do the labor that no one else wants to do. And we haven't even talked about the centuries of slavery, racism, gerrymandering, redlining, and a million other things that have been employed to deliberately destroy communities that have contributed to the massive Black and Latino population in prisons today. That in itself isn't just a whole other video. People have dedicated PhD theses, books, entire lives to studying that, because it's a centuries-long system that is multifaceted, nuanced, and extremely complicated. And it's still at work today. If you're interested in more information on this, here are just a few sources that touch on that topic. Honestly, if you think that Black and Latino people end up in prison more often than white people because they just decide to commit more crimes, you may as well just admit out loud that you think white people are better than people of color and just move on with your life. Chapter 7, Escaping the Camp. So you may be thinking, wow, Athena, this is grim. This is really grim, like grimmer than you usually are. Is there any hope for these inmates at all? Well, that depends on who you ask. Beyond the prison industrial complex, there are a lot of people who seem to have made it their jobs to keep inmates in prison specifically because of the free labor they provide. For example, in 2014, lawyers under Kamala Harris's office wrote, "Extending 2-for-1 credits to all minimum custody inmates at this time would severely impact fire camp participation, a dangerous outcome while California is in the middle of a difficult fire season and severe drought." This was in response to a 2011 Supreme Court decision ruling that California's prison systems were so overcrowded that it violated the Constitution's cruel and unusual punishment clause. Apparently, Kamala Harris told these lawyers to shut the fuck up and not use that argument again, But luckily it didn't matter, since that argument was rejected anyway. Some states have programs that help inmates get jobs as firefighters after they get released from prison. California has the Forestry and Fire Recruitment Program, which was started by 2 formerly incarcerated wildland firefighters, and now helps other currently and formerly incarcerated firefighters find their way into the industry. Colorado's state wildland inmate fire team is instrumental in fighting fires every year, and in 2021, a law was passed to ease the transition for inmates from incarcerated firefighter to firefighter working for a free department. That sounds great. What could possibly be the downside? Well, the fact is, former inmates' criminal records often precludes them from even being able to get the certifications necessary to be able to join a free department. Formerly incarcerated firefighters in California, and I suspect in other states also, must go through all of their fire certifications again once they leave prison, and you often can't even apply for those if you have a criminal record. Sometimes there are exceptions, especially in states like Colorado and California, which have taken strides to write exceptions into the law book. But you know what really doesn't have exceptions? Something that's necessary to join most fire departments? An EMT certificate. And those schools are almost always extremely strict on you not having a criminal record. Also, being a wildland firefighter often means traveling to other states to help them out with their fires, something that a lot of people on probation or parole simply cannot do. And you know that law that I mentioned that Colorado just recently passed that allowed former members of the state wildland inmate fire team to get hired onto free wildland fire teams after they've been freed from prison? Well, since this article was updated on March 31st, 2023, not a single previously incarcerated firefighter has been through this program. Not a single one even applied. It's definitely at least partially because of the obstacles I mentioned, but you'd think that out of the 12 inmates that have been released since this law was passed, at least one would apply, right? So something else might be going on here. It might be that the inmates didn't even know about the opportunity. It might be that with the number of times they've been let down by the system, they might not trust that this opportunity is real. It also might be that they've done their time in more ways than one, and they just don't want to fight fires anymore. There's no way to know without asking them. Chapter 8, Breaking the Chain. So, what does all of this even mean? I know I've said a lot about firefighters and prison and race, but I'm the type of person that likes to do something once I'm done talking about it. If you're not, that's fine. Like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one. But if what I've said has moved you, even the slightest bit, then I'd like to leave you with some actionable things that you can do. If I left something out or forgot something, please leave it in the comments. I'd love to hear from you, and I'd also love to learn more about this. First, call your local representatives. Second, vote. Not just in the big elections every 4 years. Vote in your municipal elections, because those things affect your life just as much, if not more. If this whole mass incarceration thing came as a shock to you and you want to tear that motherfucker down, there are several organizations that are trying to do just that. In my opinion, the two that have the biggest bang for your literal or metaphorical buck are the Sentencing Project and the Vera Institute. Links are in the description. Other than that, take care of each other. Be kind. I know, that's fucking weird coming from me. But the world fucking sucks. And it's cruel. And it's cruelest of all to the people who are already down. So let's all just maybe take a breath, take a break, and wear our respirators. Take care. There was a Paw Patrol fire helmet. I didn't go with that one. Wanted to keep the message unobscured. Well, hello, and fuck. Because they fight fires in structures, or the news stations begin to flash who fight fires caused by air, especially for those who grew up in Firefighter. You might remember Changgang. You might remember I can't fucking say it. I said it the first time and I'm not gonna be able to do it again. You might, with their use of prisoners to fight. That's a lot of prepositional phrases. Oh yeah. An average of 17 firefighters were... Why did I write it like that? There is no national standard for respiratory... Mining as an industry is governed by... Mining as an industry is governed by... Why can't I say the fucking word? Mining as an industry is governed by... There are too many ends. There's a lot of ends. It's fine. I wish I could talk. But that's okay. Yeah, jargon. That came out like garbage. Here we go. Let's talk about the prison industrial complex on youtube.com. Making phone calls prohibitively... Making phone calls fuck! Why did I put this word in here? Prohibitively? Is that right? Prohibitively? I think that's it. Prohibitively. Making phone... and refusing to provide exit counseling to prepare the... Fuck! I'm so close to the end. I'm hungry. Next time I book this place, I swear to God, I'm gonna put a sign on the door that says, like, filming porno, do not come in unless you plan to join. Like, the recording sign is on. For fuck's sake. Have you no respect? Look, I am not in the show business, but I would think that you would respect the recording sign. Anyway. I'm cooking. Stop interrupting me while I cook, random people.